So good morning. Good morning, everybody. Welcome at the Cybersecurity Summer Hub, organized by Forum Europe. Allow me also to mention ECSO, the European Cybersecurity Organization, and Women for Cyber, which are the strategic partners of this event. We start now with the most expected session on European digital sovereignty. What role will cybersecurity play in deepening Europe's digital independence? We will have first a keynote speech from Margrethe Vestager, Executive Vice President from A Europe Fit for Digital Age, the European Commission. Will be followed by a panel discussion including Josianne Cutajar, member of the European Parliament. We will not take questions for the speech of Vice President Vestager, but only for the following panel. Vice President Vestager, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. I have really been looking forward to this, and of course we will be following the debates afterwards. It is an unprecedented situation, and this is of course why this debate is so timely. Never have we lived through times like these. The economic impact of the pandemic is unprecedented, and yet it could have been so much worse. Had we been in a world without technology, it would have been a completely different thing. We would not have been able to get in control of the virus. We would not have been able to keep working, learning, socializing, exercising. No, it would have been completely different. And I think it has been a crash course on digitization. People who thought that, well, maybe in another life I'll get there. All of a sudden they realize that in order to be able to shop, be able to stay in touch, better figure out how to deal with technology. The thing is, of course, that with an increasing use, of course, also comes an even bigger challenge of protecting the security and the confidentiality of what we do online. We have seen those who have tried to take advantage of the situation, malicious attacks on our systems, on our infrastructure, on hospitals. And that, I think, has been extremely worrying, that in this situation, health authorities and hospitals have been the renewed targets for people who want us evil. Fortunately, we have avoided a cyber crisis. That would have been a really aggravating feature of the health crisis if that had been the case. Nevertheless, it has been avoided, but we have been preparing for a situation like this. Both the EU institutions and member states have increased the information sharing during this crisis. And I think the lesson learned here will be very important for future crises with a cybersecurity dimension, and it will also inform our upcoming proposals. We also worked very hard to make sure that technology can be a useful tool in addressing the pandemic. For instance, we were swift to issue recommendations and a toolbox for the development of virus tracing apps. And that have helped ensure that apps can now be released by member states, designed in a way so that people actually can trust them and hopefully because of that also use them. Because without that trust, well, no tool will be effective. Let me just say a few words about Europe's economic recovery and the role of cybersecurity within it. On the 22nd of May, the Commission put forward its proposal for a major recovery plan. It includes a new recovery instruments, Next Generation EU, embedded within a powerful, a modern, a revamped long-term EU budget. We see this proposal as a turning point for Europe. our willingness to act in common, well, that must be measured with the challenges that we face together, because no one can recover alone. We can only strongly and fast recover together. It is the first time that the Commission will borrow on a big scale. We suggest that we will borrow 750 billion euros by issuing bonds on the financial markets and channel that money into investment needed in the economic recovery. Obviously, that level of borrowing will put a strain on future generations. And this is why it's so important that these funds are not just used to rebuild an old world, but are truly used to renew that world. Because that was what we was about to do, to renew that old world, to make it green and to make it digital. And because of that, also serving next generations who will have the responsibility of paying back the debts. So the least we can do is to make sure that we invest in things that makes our societies future-proof. To ensure that this happens, in order to receive part of this funding, member states will have to design their own national recovery plans based on the reform priorities that are identified within the European semester, national reform plans, and their climate change plans. And in turn, we will also monitor the implementation. When it comes to digitization, we have 4 priorities. We want to invest in state-of-the-art connectivity. We want a stronger industrial presence in strategic parts of the digital supply chain. Third, we want to build a real data economy as a motor for innovation. And last but not least, we will need a business environment that allows businesses a fair chance to compete, but also to scale up. Across all these priorities, there is a common thing that runs through it. And that is, of course, to guarantee the security of our digital systems. Because without cybersecurity, we will not be able to ensure Europe's technological sovereignty. Since the beginning of the mandates, I have received a lot of questions about, well, what is it that you're thinking about? What is technological sovereignty? And sometimes it's easier to start by answering what it's not. Sovereignty is not the same as isolation. Europe has enormously benefited from its openness. The international flows of goods, services, innovation has had a tremendous effect on our prosperity, and that includes also the digital field. And it will play a key role in our economic recovery. Sovereignty is about having the ability to decide on our own what kind of digital economy and society we want to be. For instance, if we depend on a single supplier for critical components in our digital supply chain, it means that we cannot decide, and hence we're not sovereign. If we don't trust that we can communicate strongly, secure among ourselves, without foreign oversight or interference, well, then we are not sovereign. And if companies that innovate in our single market cannot protect their intellectual property from being stolen by foreign competitors, then we are not sovereign. In other words, without a strong level of cybersecurity across the board, we will not be technologically sovereign. So strengthening our European cybersecurity has been a policy priority for the Commission, not only now, but also in recent years. I think that together we have already achieved quite a lot. The Cybersecurity Act entered into force in June last year. It strengthens the mandate of the European Union Agency for Cybersecurity. I think everyone would call it ENISA, and established the EU Cybersecurity certification framework for digital products and services. Negotiations are also well advanced to establish a European Cybersecurity Competence Center and network that should boost our common efforts in research and development of cybersecurity technologies. And I have very high hopes that we will find agreement on this important proposal within the next month. If you have, which I would guess, followed closely the discussion about 5G, you'd see the initiatives that we have taken on 5G networks, including the common toolbox of mitigating measures that now forms the common approach by member states to address security risks connected to the rollout of 5G. We're closely monitoring its implementation, and we will collectively report on progress by the end of this month. Going forward, there are a couple of things that we would want to do more. First, by the end of the year, we will review the Security of Network and Information System, the NIS directive, so that it can be adapted to the new challenges that we face. Second, as announced by President von der Leyen, we will propose the establishment of a joint cybersecurity unit. And this should help us to move from a need to know to a need to share culture of cooperation. And third, we will give a push for a single market for cybersecurity. The last thing is, first and foremost, of course, an economic opportunity. The global market for cybersecurity products is growing at an unprecedented, in an unprecedented way, between 15 and 20% annually. And there are growth opportunities in most business segments, that be networks or enterprise security, and increasingly also in private consumer spheres. I think one example of that would be the demand is growing for personal security, private mechanisms that are compliant with the general data protection regulation. I think it's quite natural that people worry and they want to be certain that their digital payment systems are secure and that they can trust applications linked to our digital identities and EID cards. The thing is that Europe has so much to offer here, but we could do much better. Last time we counted, Europe was the headquarter of only 14% of the top 500 global cybersecurity providers, compared to 75% for the Americas, 7% for Israel, 4% for Asia. And, you know, Europe is noted for its cybersecurity know-how in cryptography and secure components. So it's not a given that it has to be that way or remain in this way, because we have a key strength in excellent scientific and skill base in this area. Not least, regulations such as the General Data Protection Regulation and the Network Information System Directive can be an opportunity for market growth for European solutions. And that is true also for the European presence in sort of more traditional products such as automotive. Our weaknesses, on the other hand, lies in the limits to scalability. Our know-how is insufficiently commercialized, often due to market fragmentation, lack of venture capital investments, and because of that, growth perspective for small and medium-sized businesses. And this is why it's so important that we establish a true single market for cybersecurity, and that we work harder and find the bottlenecks and find ways to overcome those. One way of achieving this is through a solid European cybersecurity certification framework. It will provide European industry and digital service providers with the tools that they can use to demonstrate to the global markets that their products, their services, well, they have state-of-the-art cybersecurity features. Using globally recognized European and international standards and best practices as the basics, as the foundation of our certification schemes, that will allow our companies to remain competitive. European cybersecurity certificates, well, they provide confidence in users. Individual citizens, in companies, that the equipment that they purchase or the services that they use, well, that will address also the latest cybersecurity threats. By the end of May, the Commission announced establishment of a cybersecurity certification stakeholder group. This group represents both industry, consumers, and standardization and certification bodies. And that will assist us in charting the right path forward together with our partners from national authorities. And I think that is very important, because in order to get it right, we need to work together. So I'm very hopeful that this stakeholder group will enable us to do something that will work fast, be implemented fast, and give that boost to European cybersecurity industry. Let me just end or conclude by recalling sort of the fundamental logic of our recovery plan for Europe. The stimulus needed now will be repaid by the next generation of Europeans. And this is why it is so important that we do not just rebuild the societies and the economy that we had, but that we renew it, that we invest in a future that works for them. Because we didn't want the old world. We wanted a new one. And here we have an opportunity. I think everyone would have wished for the coronavirus never, ever to have hit us. But now when it's the case, then let's do something unprecedented as well, to invest massively in getting that green and that digital society that will serve us as European citizens so much better. Never had the responsibility for anyone working with digitization been higher. And by making a common effort, and here cybersecurity is of the essence, because it creates trust. I can engage with technology because I am safe in doing that. Well, then we can pave the way not only for recovery, but also for a much, much stronger European continent. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Vice President, for your intervention. I would simply like to take just one takeaway of what you said. So we need to renew the economy. We want to establish a new world, and also we want to establish a true single market for cybersecurity. I think these are really key words that will lead us in the recovery and in the future. Thank you again for your intervention. And
thank you very much. Likewise.
So we will continue our panel with some introductory remarks from Josianne Cutajar, which is a member of the European Parliament from Malta. And then we'll go on with the other panelists, which will be introduced later. So, Mrs. Cutajar, the floor is yours.
Hi everyone. Thank you, Luigi, and thank you also to Forum Europe for this invitation, and thank you to the Vice President who also joined us this morning. And yes, let me start by joining in what our Vice President said. It's very important that we don't go back to the old normal, but we renew the old world, including when it comes to the digital and the twin transition of the digital transformation and the green agenda. And in this digital age, it is not a mere slogan for us Europeans to be aiming to achieve a recognizable digital sovereignty. It started well before the new Commission took office, and its first moves then did well to instill general conviction in the direction we are heading to. I consider it key to maintain, if not recover, our status and role of global leadership in an increasingly digital world. Attaining digital sovereignty is necessary if we are to keep up both economically and also industrially. For a long time, we have debated whether to cultivate European digital champions, how to have hyperscalers, and how to create manufacturers which are able to compete with international giants to the west and also to the east. It is true that in order to be fully autonomous in the digital sector, the ownership of companies producing technological goods and providing digital services does matter a lot. It means that Europe should control crucial strategic assets. But what are we if we cannot provide for our own security? Technological progress is not set to slow down anytime soon. The advent of 5G continues to unleash a reality unimaginable until a few years ago. Enabling the Internet of Things, connecting our goods at home, our road networks and transport networks, and also our health and medicinal products are key. It is not too difficult to envisage the scale of change we are set to introduce to our daily lives. It is also not too difficult to understand the escalating risks to our daily lives if we are not sufficiently secure. There is an intrinsic link between sovereignty and security. Max Weber, without referring to the digital era, rightly considered security among the most basic of features a modern state should be able to provide. We may have differing views on what role the state should play, but there seems to be general consensus that providing for the security of the people is in fact the most fundamental expression of sovereignty. As more and more activity takes place in cyberspace, the same degree of security is rightfully expected. Security is not limited to the protection of military assets and the prevention of military cyber threats. It also is very relevant in the civilian sphere. From electric grids to water systems, transport, communications, the regular flow of goods and services, and our democratic electoral processes. Nothing is immune to cybersecurity and cyber threats. The potential negative implications on the correct functioning of our institutions and the repercussions on our daily lives are there for all to see. It is hardly shocking, therefore, that the World Economic Forum listed cyber attacks on critical infrastructure among the top five short-term global risks for 2020. Not unlike any form of security, nothing short of a comprehensive approach would do when it comes to cybersecurity. We should start by enhancing digital governance and going on to then the quantum leap required in our general attitude and culture towards cybersecurity, and also the increase of vigilance in our enterprises and government actors. These have to be in a position to understand the cyber world and the risks entailed, and then to prevent them. Our approach has to be rooted in building skills, as this induces the much-needed resilience of small actors like SMEs, which are very possible targets and so close to home to our assets. It also unlocks a wealth of opportunities, among which is quality employment. In its report last year, ENISA, a crucial player in the enhancement of European digital governance, said it plainly. A workforce deprived of skills in cybersecurity represents a risk both for our economic development and for our national security. Europe today lacks around 300,000 cybersecurity professionals, double the figure of the previous years and of the previous year, which means double the risks. Experts and professionals in this field, including many chief information security officers, have underlined how difficult it is to hire new talents and how this shortage of skills might expose their organizations to greater risks. SMEs largely rely on ICT professionals with a generic understanding of the field to devise and run their cybersecurity strategies. This is not adequate. It is not adequate when we consider the role these enterprises have in our economy. Not adequate when we consider the wealth of knowledge they hold and also the property, be it physical or intellectual, the financial assets, the personal information, trade secrets, and so on. If we are seriously intent on assuming digital sovereignty, we have to turn the page. But how should we do this? Collaboration, as our Vice President mentioned, is key. We need really a market of collaboration, enhancing synergies among government, industry, academia. This will not only help address the chronic lack of science, technology, engineering and mathematics graduates, the so-called STEM disciplines, but it will also prove to be a powerful tool to spread the culture of cybersecurity at the local level and within the productive ecosystem. As the S&D negotiator on the European SME strategy, I will make sure that the digital innovation hubs, which are meant to build the digital capabilities of local actors, including the smallest ones, be instrumental in spreading the culture of cybersecurity among those stakeholders that are still not fully aware of the meaningful impact digital threats can have on their activities and their clients' lives. The public sector has a big role to play here. If governments all around the continent have entrusted almost everything to cyberspace, from personal data to critical infrastructure, they now have to do much more to protect this new paradigm. Sovereigns are leaders by nature. If Europe is to assume digital sovereignty, the European Union has to be at the forefront in coordinating global cooperation and forging cyber diplomacy, as this will ensure an acceptable level of security for all of us. Thank you, and I look forward now to the debate.
Thank you, Josianne. Thank you for your inspiring remarks. And now we will continue with the panel, with the other panelists. I would like to introduce them. By the way, it's interesting that we have the majority of the panelists are women today. So we have 3 out of 5 women in our panel. Apart from Josianne, we have Lise Fuhr, Director General at ETNO. Welcome, Lise. Liga Rozentāle, Director Government Affairs from Cybersecurity, from Microsoft. Hello, Liga. Luis Álvarez Satorre, the CEO of SIA, an Indra company, and Pierre Chastanet, the head of unit in cloud and software, the DG Connect, the European Commission. And let me also say that with Pierre, we set up the PPP on cybersecurity, so which is still running, and with Pierre is very, very knowledgeable, not only on cloud now, but also on cybersecurity. So we start this panel on sovereignty, and we heard the Vice President giving somehow giving some indication for the future where we have to cooperate. We need really to establish a new world, but is there a place, a real place in this new world for sovereignty? It's just an illusion? Maybe Luis, you start first.
Okay, well, it's a pleasure, and I think we have plenty of topics and food for thought after what we have heard, which has been, I think, extremely useful. I think that my first reflection would be that, and the panel is talking about digital independence, and my question is digital independence really is not a dream? It's something that is going to be impossible as such, and how we build a degree of autonomy, and at the same time that we run our destiny. If we look to the amount of traffic that is going through major global US-based players or East players, it's almost 80% for year 2030 or so. Also, when you look to the ability of running the global internet, where we really want to keep the open internet, you look to ICANN, we need to have probably a stronger role there. So I think that the first question is not having digital independence just a dream, or is something that we need to address and manage together, which is what I personally believe, right? In that sense, I think that there are two elements that are critical for that kind of running our destiny on ourselves. On one hand is building the right skills and talent, and that means that the education system has to provide that infrastructure, and that has to be a common goal across the European Union. And the other one is built on existing players, and we have heard the Vice President talking about how we create those players. We already have companies like Indra, companies like Thales, who are able to create that and to drive an ecosystem of relationships with organizations like X or with SMEs, as we mentioned before. My second point is about today, the cybersecurity is a prerogative of countries. So how can we enforce, how can we drive harder that each country is improving dramatically their role and their ability to fulfill our requirements? And I think that we should create some kind of KPIs, dashboard, or enforce some of the ones we have today. We have to create ratings so that people can see where they sit in the whole list of compliance around what we want to do in cybersecurity. And the third one has to do with our ability to protect ourselves, because we are a target. And it's clear we have seen this in some of the European elections. We have seen this in a number of the attacks we suffer. And we need to create that internal capability. I think certification is a great way of achieving that. But my personal view is that we should also encourage that the awareness across all the bodies, public and private sector, is part of our strategy to help our sovereignty, which is, at the end of the day, as we said, is not just being isolated, it's just being part of a more global ecosystem. And we do have that opportunity, I think.
Thank you, Luis, for your intervention. Very sharp, very quick, and somehow challenging with the dashboard for the countries, I would say. Now we move on with this with a few minutes of introductory speak for for the different panelists, and then we will go on questions from also from the audience or discussion among us. Pierre, would you maybe, if you can take the floor, you are now head of unit for cloud and software. Cloud is very important because it's very much linked to the data strategy. Also, we heard about this new initiative that GaiaX, Sovereign Cloud, and so on. So a lot is boiling on your side. Tell us a little bit your main points.
Okay, good morning, Luigi, and good morning to all. So, indeed, this is a very important point. The role of data in the future of the digital economy. This was really highlighted in the data strategy put forward by the European Commission at the beginning of the year, in February of this year. Data is really going to be essential to fuel European artificial intelligence. This is if we want to build reassurance for companies to trust artificial intelligence, to trust blockchain, to trust big data analytics. It's very important that companies, citizens can rely, have the necessary reassurance on how these data were processed, the origin of this data. And thus the importance to have the necessary infrastructure, the necessary services to process all those data. An additional concern that has emerged over the past year is the increased application or potential application of foreign jurisdiction on the territory of the European Union, especially on data infrastructure that are located in the EU, but that are owned by companies headquartered outside of the EU. So this can really potentially undermine the good development of the data economy, the adoption of AI and these other emerging digital technologies that I mentioned. Just to give a key figure, there currently it's only one company in 4 in the European Union that are using cloud computing, and when you look at SMEs, it's only one company in 5. So it shows that there's really a problem of mistrust by European companies that do not want to take the step to move into the cloud. And this is really problematic because this will undermine their digital transformation in the short term, and thus undermine their competitiveness. What we see is that the cloud market and more broadly the data infrastructure and services market in the EU, also in the rest of the world, Europe is not very different from the rest of the world in that respect. That market is very concentrated, and the degree of concentration has actually accelerated over the past years. If you look at the current market situation, the top 3 cloud players in the EU are controlling 75% of the infrastructure market in the EU. So this, of course, raises a legitimate concern by companies to put too much of their eggs, critical application, critical data into the same basket. On other trends that we see emerging, and this was also a very important element of the data strategy, I would like to highlight the importance of edge computing. One of the technology capacity that is emerging is the possibility to process and store data close to where the data are being generated, and to operate artificial intelligence at the edge. So that can take place in the car or at the crossroad of traffic road. It can take place in an hospital. It can take place in a public administration or a manufacturing site. So this is a very important trend, and we expect that this will accelerate in the coming years. We also see this as an opportunity for Europe, so to provide data processing services, including AI, close to the users, so within the companies that will be using this edge node. In the European data strategy, the Commission, analyzing this different trend, proposed to undertake a significant investment and to create a virtuous circle between creating supply that currently does not exist on the European market. So supply of highly distributed computing capacity that are energy efficient, so green and highly secured. And articulate this with a new demand side. So the idea of stimulating data sharing, data exchange among companies from the same sector, and to create common European data spaces. So such common European data spaces will be able to fuel machine learning process driven by European data, fueling European AI. And with this, we can really create that virtuous circle between the sectoral demand for data services and European supply of data infrastructure and services. The last point I wanted to highlight is the fact that we don't exclude any actor in that game. So Europe maintain its high degree of openness. So EU remains a very open economy, but nevertheless we want that there is a competitive field there, and we want to ensure that common rules apply to all actors of the market. So as we're undertaking the development of this high impact project on Common European Data Space and European Cloud Federation, we want to make sure that common rules are going to be applied on data protection, on data portability, on cybersecurity, of course, for the provision of cloud services in the EU. And we're very happy that France, Germany, in the recent announcement on GAIX, have followed a very similar approach to what we're pursuing at European level. So GAIX appears a very promising initiative. We're coordinating very closely with our German and French counterparts, and we're really convinced that this different initiative will contribute to the development of the European digital sovereignty. I will stop it here, and looking forward to the further discussion. Many thanks.
Thank you, Pierre, for your intervention. Already giving me some questions to you, but we'll go first to the other speakers, and we will continue on telecom. Lise, you are the Director General of ETNO, European Association Telecom, and telecom. Yeah, I know that you are very proud of somehow that you survived the stress test during the COVID. Telecom performed very well, and telecom are really the basis of all our let's say of our exchange of data, and as such they are the basis of whatever independency, of you want to call it sovereignty, or at least we telecom are needed to see how the data are going around. So you have a key role. What are your points on this?
Well, thank you, Luigi, and thank you for inviting ETNO to this very timely and relevant event. As you were saying, the infrastructure is key on the data, and also, of course, we're very concerned on digital sovereignty and issues around security. And we just heard the Commission giving their strong and clear vision on digital sovereignty that actually includes economic factors, geopolitical and ethical. But I would actually like to twist it a bit. I think I would like to refer it as digital leadership instead of sovereignty. I think that sovereignty is a bit inward looking. It's about protection. It's about emancipation from external forces. It's a bit more defensive. So for me, leadership is the contrary of protectionism. And I think it's building on the resource of to face global competition. It's a part of the global environment, as we all are. And it's more about proactiveness. So here, there are two main elements. One is governance and another one is technology. I think they are key in digital leadership. And governance that's about defining the rules of the game in Europe in the digital market. And we know there is an increasing demand for trustworthy services and for digital services that put European values at the core. So taking leadership here, that means that we ensure that all the players in Europe respect these values and these principles, and actually that they all comply with the European rules that protect privacy, that security, and its integrity. So protecting the European way of governing digital markets is actually also offering a role model for the world to follow. So I think this is a key area. And we have a great precedent in the GDPR that actually changed the way the world understood privacy, and it's shaping data protection all over the world. So that's a key thing from Europe. Second, on technology, which is important, the notion of digital sovereignty understood as simply increasing Europe's supply of crucial technologies or products is the normal way to understand it. But I think it's often looked at as we need to substitute made in Europe for all the other foreign solutions. But here I agree also with what Pierre said on we need openness, and there is a space and a need, of course, for more European players in many segments of the digital value chain. But in cloud market, we heard the numbers. I have numbers of non-European actually account for more than 80% of the global markets. So where is Europe in all of this? But again, digital leadership is not us versus them. It's more about openness in the core of the leadership. And here I think Gaia X is an extremely good example. It's actually showing how Europe's quest for digital leadership is not about protectionism. Gaia X is an open standard for trusted and privacy-minded services, and that's open to all global players. But back to your question on infrastructure, and I think the 5G infrastructure here it's the perfect test bed for the idea of leadership. So if we look at 5G and what will it do? It's a connectivity infrastructure that actually will transform how we have networks today. They're more virtual, they're more open, and they're more shared. So our network will become platforms. And through virtualization and softwareization, we will work with telecom operators, third-party providers, and customers, and we will combine and intersect over the same underpinning infrastructure. And exactly because of this interdependence of providers and third parties over the same platform, we will see that the 5G infrastructure will exponentially increase the attack surface that are in the networks and its vulnerability points. And looking at Internet of Things, the numbers are huge here. By 2025, we actually believe that over 1 trillion of devices will be connected to the Internet. And of course, we heard cybersecurity is key in having digital sovereignty, or for me, digital leadership. So looking at 5G infrastructure and thinking that we will have more points of access to vulnerabilities, will we actually then close the networks and ring fence it? Should we do it differently and be more a closed infrastructure? Again, I think no, we should not. This would go against the nature of 5G, but the solution is a very strong governance here. And security in 5G requires a more holistic approach to how we deal with it. And that is understood as a shared responsibility amongst all the actors of the value chain. So if we look at the 5G architecture, this is an open platform, but if we have strong security obligations as telcos, maybe we should also consider those strong security obligations for the rest part of the value chain. So we think that hardware and software suppliers should be included in these measures. So a shared responsibility actually implies a shared burden on security. And again, of course, also I want to underline that 5G architecture itself will offer strong technological solutions. We have stronger encryption, stronger authentication, network slicing, etc. So we can actually mitigate many of these risks. So again, back to digital leadership, the first key to a leading 5G infrastructure is we have high standards of security that should be met by all the players in the value chain through shared responsibility. The second one is technology, and here dependency on vendors is a key component, and there is a risk factor here. But this is not only from security, but also from the investment side. But again, pursuing a closed system saying that we will ban certain vendors, just replace them with sovereign alternatives in the absence of actually a clear and substantial danger, that might kill investments rather than encourage any investments. So I'm very pleased that we have the 5G toolbox that highlighted the importance of a multi-vendor strategy, and the telecom industry has highly committed to this approach. And we should discuss the best way that governments and industry can promote a multi-vendor approach, reducing dependency on different ways, while we preserve openness and choice and competitiveness in the 5G technology market. And my last point is an interesting way forward is Open RAN here, which disaggregates hardware and software and creates an open interface again between the two. Open RAN is creating a virtual infrastructure that is interoperable and vendor neutral. So again, it gives flexibility to operators to choose the best solution to shape and improve the infrastructure. So to conclude on my points on digital leadership, well, we see 5G as a perfect testbed of digital leadership, but that should build on two keystones: a strong governance model with shared responsibilities for all players in the value chain, and an open and interoperable infrastructure that actually promotes choice, efficiency, and innovation. Thank you.
Thank you, Lise. I think that there are a number of points that I think are very important, what you said, apart from digital leadership, which is let's say it's a market-driven view of a liberal view of sovereignty. It's not only something upon which we have to build, but with which we have to, as you said, we have to share. We have to share security, we have to share responsibility. So it's something that should be much more integrated. And also what Pierre said about the edge. I mean, these things are not just building upon. but is building with. Okay, so now let's move on. So we have Liga now from Microsoft. So let's say Microsoft. Say what is Microsoft in these sovereignty issues? No, indeed, Microsoft. We are cooperating very well with Microsoft in ECSO, and I'm very pleased to have Liga with us. And we do have to cooperate with not only with let's say the European company, but all with those companies with which we have to build upon some trusted environment. So Liga, please.
Thank you, Luigi, and thank you for letting me express my points on this issue. I think Commissioner Vestager made a very important point in saying that when we were dealing with the COVID crisis, we very much realized that it was technology that saved every aspect of this global problem, and the technology is indeed global, and we deal with these challenges, whether it be in digital technology and transformation or cybersecurity, we deal with them very globally. So from the aspect of global tech companies and how that integrates into the European digital independence or digital sovereignty, we have to look at how partnerships can be formed to address the political and economic objectives of Europe. And Microsoft sees itself as very ingrained in these issues in Europe. And if you look at digital sovereignty, I very much like Lisa's approach to digital leadership versus digital sovereignty. But I've thought a lot about how we look at various levels of digital responsibility that build up to this digital sovereignty. For instance, one of the issues in looking at digital responsibility unpacked into several categories is, first of all, responsibility for digital legislation, and how Europe is certainly the powerhouse of legislation on digital issues, and that's been seen through GDPR addressing privacy, also the NIS directive addressing cybersecurity more specifically. But Europe would like to increase the liability and responsibility of the digital sector, which is completely adequate, and Europe has the ability to shape this legislation to address ethical concerns, address sustainability, privacy, and environmental impact. And in this sense, the company I represent certainly encourages these approaches. We've had very many initiatives to fulfill these ideas, especially on environmental sustainability and a green approach to digital technology development with our carbon negative announcement a few weeks ago. Further, I wanted to address also the digital responsibility in the context of skills and jobs. I think that in this sense, there's a very high benefit for public-private partnerships with companies within Europe and also with global companies, as we do have a large presence in Europe, and we try to advance various areas of research and technology and innovation throughout Europe with in initiatives such as our innovation centers, our AI schools, and so forth, because it's really these digital skills that need to be developed, that in order to have the staff to fuel these digital jobs within Europe and to further develop innovation and have more technological independence in Europe as well. Pierre said that 1 out of 5 SMEs does not use cloud services, and I think that there's certainly an element of trust involved in choosing cloud services, but there's also an element of lack of skills for those employed by SMEs. Companies who have chief technical officers prove to be much more innovative, can address digital transformation, and also address issues of trust more actively in order to be able to make decisions that make them more future-proof and forward-leaning and beneficial in that regard. As far as for responsibility for future development of digital industry within Europe, there's also an issue of addressing interoperability standards and certifications. Without global standards and certifications and global interoperability, European products will have difficulties going out into the market. And thus ENISA is doing extremely important work in fulfilling the objectives of the Cybersecurity Act and the cybersecurity certification framework. And we're happy to be participating specifically in the cloud certification development group right now. But also the European Cybersecurity Organization and Luigi have been instrumental in providing and pulling together public-private actors to be able to give adequate input to these processes as well. So that has been extremely helpful for them to be able to discuss issues of certification and how global standards could apply, or where there need to be new tailored approaches. Additionally, here I would like to commend the initiative of Women for Cyber, who is also fostering this, as in when looking for developing skills and education, it's also important to address gender issues in this sense. And so Microsoft is a very active and enthusiastic contributor and supporter of Women for Cyber, as we also very much believe within our diversity and inclusion principles that we should promote, encourage, and support the participation of women in cybersecurity. And I'm glad to see a few of us on this panel as well. So thank you for the gender equality on the panel. Also, one issue I wanted to address, which is a bit further away from digital sovereignty, is also the responsibility for digital diplomacy. Here we think that Europe is certainly the foremost leader in promoting digital diplomacy in the sense of responsibility of state actors in cyberspace, and also for the applicability of international law in cyberspace. And Microsoft has also been very, very active in promoting these issues, whether it's at the UN level or looking for ways for cooperating in Europe to support this very strong position of Europe of state responsibility. We do so actively through the Paris Call, which is a multi-stakeholder initiative with over 1,000 endorsers who are working towards endorsing various principles that foster cybersecurity norms globally. So I could start off with those comments, and I'll be happy to take any further questions on these various points.
Thank you, Liga. Thank you for your comments. Also adding a few notes on Women for Cyber, for which Microsoft made it's a large donation as well, and we are very glad for this. I had to stress this. It's important. And then exactly, I would like to come back also we have something like 15 minutes, roughly. We are late, but we have been allowed to have 15 more minutes for the discussion with Josianne, because you are the shadow rapporteur of the Parliament for the SME strategy, and SMEs have been mentioned a number of times during this discussion. We heard that SME have difficulty and not joining much, not using the cloud, let me say, mistrust or whatever. But we know that how important are SMEs for Europe to contribute to the digital transformation, to innovation, and so on. Not all the company can be Microsoft, the size of Microsoft, but we need to start. But Microsoft was once an SME, so long ago. So we definitely need also to support all this, and also the importance. We have one question about which came out, by the way, yesterday, also in another panel, the cost of certification. For SMEs, certification is important to build up this common view. It has been mentioned several times in our discussion today, but the cost for SMEs is important. How can we help SMEs to be part of the game and not be only just maybe a future champion or maybe nothing?
Yes, thank you, Luigi, and thank you to the other panelists for the interesting points which were brought up. Certainly, SMEs face certain costs, and they don't have efficiencies as in the case of larger companies. And even when we propose certain certification standards, or certain assessments or certain rules, we must always keep in mind the impact that this will have on SMEs. The same goes by, I'm meeting a lot of stakeholders at the moment to discuss this new SME strategy, and the same goes by when it comes to several also other aspects, such as participation in public tenders. It's important to strike the balance. So we should not be too bureaucratic for SMEs, in the sense that we have to keep in mind that we should keep a level playing field, and therefore keep in mind what this means to the SME to have access in certain regards, but at the same time preserve the standards we are looking at. So yes, over here we're speaking specifically as regards the EU certification framework. But I would like to take it on a more general level. And the principle that when it comes to SMEs, we have to assist them. Whilst keeping standards, we have to see if they don't have the financial means, or they may not have the means in the sense of human resources, the capability of those who would draw up certain assessments, who would draw up certain tender documents. Therefore, we need to see to it that we assist them. Standards are important, but it's also important that we see to it that our startups, our micro businesses, our SMEs are really participative. And as you said, Luigi, we have to look at SMEs not in the sense that they'll grow in the future. So a startup could eventually become a huge company, and this should be kept well in mind, and that we should also look at the digital transformation for SMEs not as a challenge, it is a challenge, but also as a huge opportunity to our SMEs.
Thank you, Josianne. And talking about the standards, because Lise mentioned also the need for high standards to work together. But how these high standards, because also Liga mentioned the standards, the global standards, we see the difficulty to have in Europe, especially when looking at sovereignty point of view. Europe wants to build up the European standards, but to become globally competitiveness, as Liga said, you need global. You have this to be accepted. So there is a contradiction. I know it's almost impossible to solve in 2 minutes. But what is your reaction on this, Lise?
I agree. The harmonization of standards are increasingly really important from the telco side. What we have asked for is first and foremost harmonization within Europe, because if we don't start in Europe, we will have problems internationally. So from our side, the more we harmonize here, we heard it from Vice President Vestager saying the aim is to harmonize more also on the cybersecurity and the standardization. I'm myself part of the stakeholder on this certification in ETNO, and we will certainly work for a European standard, of course, with a high level, because without a high level of security, we will not have digital leadership. So from our point, it starts in Europe, and then you can create, hopefully, good standards worldwide. I think GDPR is an excellent example of how we created a European standard that actually became global.
Okay, thank you. Luis, you want to add something?
Yeah, I think that I love the concept of the digital leadership that Lisa mentioned, that I was in line with my Run Your Own Destiny. And I think we should be more proud, we should be prouder of what we have in Europe already, because if you look to Galileo, that is a very good platform for us to have a degree of less dependency on other platforms like GPS, and that will allow us to really foster the whole industry around that. We have also standards like ADAS that you know very well. That ADAS is supporting a whole new way of accelerating digital business, of making things easier for people. Everything based on a keyword that we mentioned today, which is trust, right? So ADAS helps to build that trust, and that the standard is helping our companies, our people to get certified in a very easy way. And we have learned how to do this business and to create business surrounding these standards and collaboration tools. So I really believe that we should be prouder on that and build on those capabilities.
Okay, that's well, you mentioned Galileo, and I would like to come to Pierre because I have a question for him. $1 billion euro question in this case. Galileo is a major endeavor for Europe, but and you also spoke about high impact projects. Cybersecurity is everywhere, and somehow is diluted. It's not, let's say, as visible as it could be a Galileo, or it can be a high performance computing and so on. The cybersecurity is everywhere, so there is a certain difficulty in saying we have one major project on cybersecurity. Even you see what you mentioned, the Gaia X. Gaia X is cloud because it's well-defined environment, so on, and cybersecurity is just one layer on top of that. So what could be for you? I know it's almost impossible to answer, but what could be for you a high impact project on cybersecurity? What could be? And especially looking at this discussion that we have on digital independence and so on.
Yeah, this is a very difficult question indeed, because one of the challenge as we've heard in the area of 5G, in the area of cloud, essentially we're not trying to build European hyperscalers in those spaces, but rather to develop European industrial ecosystem in those areas. And I think that's a very important difference on the European approach to developing sovereignty, is maybe being more inclusive, built more actors, including SMEs, into bringing their innovation into the game and participating with other European players. But of course, that brings additional complexity, both in terms of governance and in terms of cybersecurity. If we want to ensure end-to-end security in very complex 5G networks architecture, if we want to ensure end-to-end security in data infrastructure and services, when we will have dozens, if not hundreds, of companies participating in ecosystem like GAIA-X, well, ensuring this degree of cybersecurity is a major challenge. So joining the dots between this ecosystem, a cloud federation will not work without proper 5G, especially if we want to do edge computing. So we also need to assemble this different network. The Cybersecurity Competence Center, the future work on cybersecurity industry will also need to get engaged into those activities. I remain convinced that certification has a role to play there, even if it's sometimes perceived as a heavy tool. Let me just take the opportunity to debunk a bit something that I see as a myth, that certification is just an expense. It's a wonderful marketing tool for SMEs. Just to give a specific example, in my area of cloud, we have one small Austrian cloud SME who managed to get certified on the German cloud security certification scheme that provided them unprecedented market access, including to the public procurement of the federal German system. So this was a great opportunity for them to showcase their capacity to deliver highly secure services, to participate and engage with other European actors. So certification as a tool for visibility of SMEs is very important. So I've deviated a bit from your original question, because there is no easy answer to this. But I think we have to pursue that European approach of developing industrial ecosystem, joining the dots between this ecosystem, fostering innovation, including through the very vivid SME network that we have in Europe, and use some of the larger European actors to promote, cooperate with those smaller players.
Thank you. So developing the healthy ecosystem is the high impact project indeed for Europe. Thank you. Liga, you have a quick comment and a last question for Josianne. Then we have to close because we are over time.
Yeah, I have a quick comment, a little bit towards what Pierre was saying, as well as Luis, about developing big impact European projects. I think that the sort of the incubator for these kind of things is when EU sets up the competence center, the Cybersecurity Competence Center and network, and it's very important to think about what kind of community can give input to that. As you said, Microsoft was once an SME 45 years ago. So during those 45 years, we've had an extreme extreme wealth of development of our knowledge and experience that we are willing to share in these kind of communities. And I think that can foster exactly the kind of ecosystem that you would want to have European development as well. So we should be seen as a resource rather than, and to foster this idea of openness in that sense when looking at these communities that are built specifically to address various digital issues, but specifically cybersecurity.
Thank you, Liga. Just a last word for Josianne, because Luis at the beginning talk about awareness, the need for awareness, and I think that's fundamental, especially as you are a politician in this panel. And yesterday also, Despina Spanu in her intervention mentioned that what we have learned of the COVID crisis is that we need preparedness, but you need preparedness, you need awareness. So how much you as a political leader, but also member of the parliament, but also as a citizen, are you aware of what is needed to do, what is needed to be done now in the future to take the right decision, to move on in the direction of a stronger digital Europe, stronger and secure digital Europe?
So first of all, yes, I do agree that awareness is essential, and we need to address digital divide, which is highly real, unfortunately, both when it comes to certain students in our schools, but also when it comes to SMEs and their workers. And therefore, if we're speaking so much of the digital divide, we need to start from educating and skilling. So this is very essential. The way forward, do I know exactly what needs to be done? This COVID pandemic has struck us quickly, and it was a way to accelerate the digital transformation for the European Parliament itself, because ironically enough, we speak so much of the digital era and the digital reforms we need to make, but once COVID struck, we didn't have the digital infrastructure in place, and we had to wait for around 2 weeks to start certain voting online, certain meetings online, and therefore this shows that even the institutions and the agencies which may work so much on the digital aspect needs to have the proper infrastructure in place and need to have the awareness in place, because there were even MEPs who are not digitally literate. Now, when it comes to the way forward, I think that we should look at this COVID pandemic and the effects it had. Look at the positives, but also we should learn from it. So surely one thing which came across is that we need more awareness and more knowledge when it comes to the digital aspects, including in this case, cyber security. As a politician, I am and I need to be in constant contact with the relevant stakeholders. Cybersecurity is evolving as we go along, so cyber threats are also evolving with us, and therefore to remain relevant, we have to be in constant contact with stakeholders. Also, we have to keep in constant knowledge and also know that we never know enough. And I think we should start from that premise to really take the positive steps forward, because we have to continue learning, we have to continue listening, and we have to continue then being relevant by passing timely laws and policies. And in the digital sphere, this needs to be more quick than ever, because we're ever evolving and we cannot be too bureaucratic to continue checking and rechecking and then not being relevant.
Thank you, Josianne, for your intervention. So digital and cybersecurity are indeed long-lasting learning experience, let me say, for all of us. Thank you, everybody, for this participation. I would like to remind you that also there are 2 parallel sessions which are ongoing: cyber certification and standards, and the future of the cybersecurity industry. Thank you again for your participation, and have a nice day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.